And so Jesus had a habit of gathering with other believers, and in those gatherings in the synagogue on the Sabbath, they would read from the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. They just called them the scrolls of the prophets or the Psalms or the Proverbs. And that day they hand him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. And there's a lot of scholarly debate as to whether Jesus picked the spot he wanted to read or whether it was the assigned spot to read on that day. I don't care about that argument. What I do know is that he read from what we call the 61st chapter of the book of Isaiah. And in that remarkable moment, I want to read for you what Jesus reads for them, but I don't want to read it from the Isaiah passage. I want to read it from the Luke passage, beginning in verse 18 of chapter 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, and he has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. And Jesus stops somewhere about in the middle of what we call verse 2 of Isaiah chapter 61, and he has laid out for them this coming individual. Someone is coming upon whom is going to be the Spirit of the Lord, upon who is going to heal the sick, upon who is going to open the prison doors for those of us who are captive, and then who is going to do this amazing thing, proclaim or preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And for a Jewish audience, the acceptable year of the Lord was the year of Jubilee. It was the year of the release of debt. It was the year in which this was the 50th year on the Jewish calendar, and in that 50th year, all lands went back to their previous owners. How would that go over in our modern day? Bring that one up at your next city council meeting. Say, I'd like to see us go back to the year of Jubilee. Whoever owned this property before me gets it back automatically in the 50th year. Be careful when you think you want a theocracy. and so Jubilee is the declaration. Debts are gone. Property goes back to its original owner. Everybody wins. God's favor falls upon the nation. The acceptable year of the Lord. And Jesus stands and proclaims in that passage, this is what's happening. This is that acceptable year of the Lord. He closed the book. He gave it back to the attendant. He sat down, and the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today is this scripture fulfilled in your hearing. Now I want you to catch that word, because that means that I'm the one of whom I just read. He says the Spirit of the Lord won't be upon some other guy. He says the Spirit of the Lord's upon me. He says I'm going to be the one that sets the captives free. I'm going to be the one that releases the broken heart. I'm going to be the one that makes the blind to see. And I declare to you, Jubilee is here. And for a people who've been screaming for, clamoring for Jubilee, I want you to imagine that you've been waiting for this moment. You've been waiting on a celebration, or in good old church lingo, you've been praying for revival, and you can feel that it's in the air. It's finally happening. The swell is happening. The excitement, the hair on the back of your neck standing up. You can sense the mighty presence of God is happening, and everybody bore witness, and they marveled at his gracious words that proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, is this not Joseph's son? What is going on here? This is amazing. This room is full with awe and excitement. Jubilee is here. Yes. Now I'm not giving you this verse yet, but I just want to read one for you, okay? We'll get there. Awe, excitement, marvelous, wow, Jubilee. And just a little while later, all those in that same synagogue, when they heard what Jesus said, were filled with wrath. And I only jumped like 7 or 8 verses. So what happens between Jubilee and we want this guy to die? How do we go from this is an exciting moment of revival, this is the greatest thing that ever happened, this is what we always look for, this is what we always prayed for, to if this is what you mean, we don't want you, we don't want to be a part of you, you need to be out of here. How do we go from that awe to that anger, and we go so quickly? I think it might be because of this. Listen to verse 25. I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months. And there was a great famine throughout all the land, but none of them was Elijah sent to except Zarephath in the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them were cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. So all those in the synagogue, when they heard these words, were filled with wrath. What is such a big deal about what Jesus just said that took them from excitement to anger? Why were they so pumped to be in Jubilee and then so mad to find out what Jubilee really was? Because remember, Jubilee is everybody gets their debts taken away. But Jubilee and 7-year release is confined. The foreigner doesn't count, remember? Deuteronomy 15, if they're a stranger, forget it. They don't get into the party. And that gives you a little sense of self, man. We're gonna get this thing from God, but we earned it, man. We're the right ones. We're doing what needs to be done. We're saying what needs to be said. We're praying the prayers we need to pray. I'm doing all of the things that line up to be the debt release. God favors me. I got grace and mercy and forgiveness and all that good stuff because I belong in the group. The others, I can't really account for them. You know, it's just not a fair world. It's just the way it goes. If they get anything, it's just a favor of God rolling off of me and onto them, and they just stay in my wake. And that's the room. The room is, this is it. This is Jubilee. And Jesus goes, before you put up your party streamers and send out your invitations for Jubilee parties, he said, I just want to remind you of a couple of little points from your own history. So a long time ago, there was a famine in the land, and God had a man named Elijah. And people were dying all over the place of this famine, both in Israel and in the foreign countries. And God sent his man out to feed a widow, because that's what God does. He feeds widows. And he takes care of the fatherless and the poor. And so God sent his man out into a poorhouse to take care of a widow and her son, to bless them, to give them enough food to make it through the famine and to do it supernaturally. And he said, and that widow was from Zarephath, a village outside of the land of Israel. And to double down on the pain of that point, Jesus then looks at them and says, were there no widows in the land of Israel that God could find? That he could have done a miracle in the house of a good Jewish girl? Why did he have to go outside of Israel to find the widow at Zarephath to be good to? And knowing that his audience is getting agitated, because it's a toughie, nobody's got a good answer, he just moves on.